Okay.
So you guys all worked on this project individually. What was it like seeing all the individual parts come together for the first time?
I guess I'll start because I have the mic. I think that we're still working on seeing it. I think one thing that Andrew mentioned yesterday in our talk in the library is that with orchestra pieces, you never really know what it's going to be like until you actually have the performance, because there's such limited rehearsal time with all the forces that are on stage and everything. And we had to dress last night, but there was still so much on each of our minds, I think, on our own pieces, and we were all distracted with other things too, that I feel like I'm not really yet sure what the piece is like all the way through. So I'm going to plead the fifth on this one and not really answer it. But okay, who wants to talk about it?
I like to think of this project as an adventure, and I think that finding out what the piece exactly is sort of the process here. I'd like to hope that this is the first of many iterations of this piece, and I think that I think as the process went along in the rehearsals, we were able to help different parts cohere together better, and so we were all sort of helping each other make adjustments to our different movements and relying on one another's ears to to improve each individual section. And I think as the piece progresses as a project, it will hopefully become more and more cogent, and also it will remain cogent while remaining diverse.
I'm sure Tim has something like what you just said.
Cogent. It was pretty diverse. It just wasn't cogent.
Sorry, I think Ted might have just texted me.
Oh, okay. We're missing Ted right now.
Does he have an answer to this question?
He does.
Via text?
No, he just sent us some slowed down Mingus,
Oh, great. This might be slowing him down.
which explains why he's late.
Right.
What was the question?
What was it like seeing all the pieces together?
Yeah.
Right?
It definitely, it was a surprise and a delight, because this thing had been so theoretical for such a long time, and there's something about, like, when you're just writing a piece on your own, you feel it coming together, and when you're in a good place, you're kind of like, okay, I'm ready to send this in or whatever. And you have a pretty good idea of what it's going to be like. Whereas this, we were all a little bit blindfolded going in a way. So yeah, it's hard to digest. I mean, the first time I heard it was last night. So I find I generally need to live with the piece for a few weeks or months, listen to it a bunch of times all the way through, just sort of at home, to let it sink in. And so, yeah, get back to it.
Agreed. One thing I will say that I feel like came to the fore in my mind last night was the spectrum or the scale on which some of us totally removed ourselves from the Mozart Requiem, and some of us totally did not remove ourselves. It was like basically Mozart, and then everything in between. It was interesting to approach the pieces that way and see how many times people were like, okay, let's just leave Mozart exactly as it is, and then I'll add some sounds on top of that, versus I'm going to just do a wholly new piece, versus I'm going to have a transition between the Mozart and my music. Do I want these things to be butting up against each other, or do I want to smoothly transition from one into the other? So that was kind of an interesting thing to realize, and I think that there's a whole variety in there. And I think that we also want to think after this performance about which of those we liked better, and if those should develop in some sort of process way, like we have more of one at the beginning, more of one at the end, or something like that, which we thought about a little bit already, but I think something that stands out a lot. Should we get Ted over here?
Yep.
Sign like this.
Oh, come on in, Ted.
Welcome.
Tell us.
I'm talking.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait.
No, I think we all are getting a very good sense of what the proportions of this piece are, and that's something that we had no idea about going in, and what sort of the cumulative effect, I think, is something that Jacob was also talking about, going back into Mozart and coming out of Mozart, and how that's all happened, and how proportionally the piece spends its time, if that makes any sense, is that was, even though we all knew I can't even say the sentence. What each other was doing, what
Yeah.
each other were doing.
What each other, even though we knew each other, what we're doing.
Okay.
No, what?
That was
a
it.
better way to phrase it.
Wait, let me text
What
my
each other
mom.
we're doing.
Conceptually,
Yes, you would know. It's
we
a
all-
subject.
Prepositional phrase.
we all knew everything about the piece conceptually, but we didn't know it experientially, if that
Right.
makes any
Yeah.
sense. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's, I think, and also, as it goes without saying, that we are going to hear it for the first time with an audience, which will, of course, change everything. So those are two factors
That's true.
that are very new and fresh, as they are with any brand new piece. But in some ways, the factors are compounded here, both by the Mozart idea and by the six of us idea. So, would you like to add anything, Ted, about what it's been like?
Does the
to
other
see-
question?
This is like, what has it been like over the last couple of days to see this thing come alive, and what are you thinking about?
You can pass it.
Oh, let me pass for now. Let me just
Okay, you can get in.
Take the fifth.
Well, I'm curious. I mean, like you guys, work together quite closely. How often do you make suggestions to your colleagues on edits or other things and ways you want to think about working together? Is that a common trait, or is it something you kind of do?
I think we normally ask
collectively?
for it if we
Yeah.
want it.
Okay.
We don't usually offer without.
Yeah.
some of us do more than others.
I mean, certainly after a concert when you've heard it, you might be like, hey, that was
Kid
great.
wrote a piece
Have you
about
thought
that. It's
about?
called Consent.
Oh yeah. I mean, certainly after a concert, you'd be like, oh, that was really cool. I really love this part. Have you thought about doing this in this part? But I reach out often and say, what do you guys think about this? Or like there was one thing where I was like, oh, do you guys think I should do scordatura for the strings? And Andrew was like, no, do not do it. And Andrew has a lot of experience with orchestras, and I think that he gave me the right answer on that.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
I think another, part of this process really was that we did conceive of approximately what everyone would be doing from the beginning and collectively. There was a meeting we had back in Chicago.
Yeah, when was it?
It was, I think, in November. This was sort of when the project coalesced.
Yeah.
When we sort of sat down and gave a rough description of what everyone would do, we decided that Timo would do a completion of Mozart's idea for a fugue on the Lacrimosa theme, and we also decided that Jacob would sort of write a replacement Sanctus, and sort of Ted and I powwowed about, and Andrew about how we'd sort of what exactly we would do with our respective movements. And I know I sort of composed my sections with an awareness of certainly what Ted and Andrew were doing, knowing that Ted was going to be pulling the scaffolding off. And I think in response I sort of instinctively was like, maybe mine will cue a bit closer to the original, just to try to create a sense of balance throughout the piece. So I think that there was, at least for me, there was a pretty acute awareness of what approximately the piece is going to be, which is to say, not to say rather that which is not to say what Timo said was not true, that there were a lot of surprises in the last few days
Yeah.
too.
Thank you, Gertrude Stein.
There was a saying that was not to say. I said it. That you can talk more.
Oh yeah, more than not at all. Yeah. Sorry.
Stop manspreading.
Oh, sorry. One thing that I found at the rehearsals that was amazing was, the piece is really strong. The Mozart piece, I really like that piece that Mozart wrote.
Well, the
And,
Mozart Requiem?
Yes, the Mozart Requiem. And
I've heard of it.
it's so. Not only is it a piece that I respect a lot, right? But I have this relationship with it that has been as long as I knew music. It's one of the first pieces I learned, and it was really cool to hear it in rehearsal because I could tell what the additions were, because I know this piece so well. And if it was like a Mendelssohn symphony or something, that wouldn't be the case at all. This is such a nice piece, and it reminds me of singing in choir. It reminds me of childhood and stuff like that. So it was actually really surprisingly moving to see my friends in a conversation with it, and just being able to hear that. It felt like you were talking to my little Ted or something. If that makes any sense. And it was really nice. I feel very lucky that we're all able to have this relationship with music that's conversational and just going forward into the future.